Week, we're starting a new series on the book of Esther. And so if you have your Bibles, open up to the book of Esther, which is, it's at the end of all of the historical stuff in the Old Testament, which, it starts with the Kings and Chronicles, and then toward the end of all that, we have Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. It's before Psalms and Proverbs and all of that. Esther's a small book. It's only about 10 chapters. It's not the last book of the Old Testament, but it is the last historical narrative book of the Old Testament. And it's a really interesting book. It's a wonderful story. So maybe some of you have caught the special that was done by, I think it's called Sight and Sound Stage. They made this stage production of it and filmed it, and it's a really wonderful story. This is a story that's been made a movie over and over again, and it just is one that captures our imagination. It has a rags to riches princess in it, and it has a really, really awful, horrible antagonist in it that wants to wipe out all the Jews, and it's just there's a lot of elements in this story that makes for a really great story. And so that's, maybe that's one of the reasons that we tend to love Esther, the story of Esther, so much. I'm hoping that today and over the next few weeks, we can take this story and just make it real. Because this is a real story. This is not a fairy tale in the middle of the Bible. This is a real story about real people. And so what we want to do is just kind of take a look at this real story that is in our scriptures and apply it to our lives. There's so much in this for us. As a matter of fact, we're not going to be able to get it all, but hopefully we'll get a lot of it, and you'll find some things very encouraging. Did a little bit of road tripping yesterday. My wife and I hopped in the car and drove to Glenwood Springs and back yesterday, and it's always fun. Don't get the chance very often on F Road to go 80 miles an hour. The neighbors get upset. No, I would never even attempt it. But getting on the freeway and just kind of open up the car and do some fun driving. Beautiful. It was so beautiful yesterday. The sunshine but one of the things that I always notice when we take a road trip are the cool little grooves that they have cut into the pavement on the sides of the lanes. I think they're called rumble strips. That's what I've heard them called all the time. Rumble strips. Somebody once called them wake-up strips. They make a lot of noise if you hit them. It's kind of fun. Especially, I know they have a purpose. The idea is that if a sleepy driver, a sleepy trucker who's been just driving so long and just tired or whatever, begins to wander out of his lane and over toward the edge of the road, he'll hit those and get that wah, 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 wah inside, and it just, jiggles everything in the car, and it wakes him up. Or in my experience, when everyone in your car is sleeping peacefully, and you're missing conversation, wouldn't it be nice to have some conversation or all this? You can just sort of drift over, and everyone will become very alert very quickly and very suspicious of your ability to continue to pilot the car. That's what they're for, I'm pretty sure. Keeps everyone on their toes, right? These rumble strips. They're very helpful. And you might think, wouldn't it be great in life if there were just kind of rumble strips for us? Whenever we were maybe had a decision to make, and we're kind of leaning in a certain direction that might not be the best direction. Wouldn't it be great if your life just sort of went, and you're like, okay, better not go that way, right? Maybe that wouldn't be so great. Maybe that would be terrifying. But God's Word actually is a great source of direction for that. As a matter of fact, it is there to guide us down the road of life so that we stay in the center of His will. The problem is, most of the time, rather than actually using God's word and the wisdom and instruction that comes from it, we tend to use our circumstances as the rumble strips in this life. We tend to use the blessings of this life. You know, if things are going your way, we call them blessings. On my notes, my hands are full. On my notes, it says blessings. All right? So when I'm saying the blessings of this life, I'm not talking about just like the literal and actual gifts that God gives us in the moment for working out His will. I'm just talking about, folks, here we live here in the Western world, in America. We are so blessed. We have second and third and fourth hand blessings that are far superior to what most people in this world experience in life. And sometimes we take those things for granted. Sometimes we take those things for God's favor. In other words, when everything's going our way, when even big or small ways, when things are the way that we think they ought to be, we hope they would be. When they are that way, what we tend to do is say, God must be very pleased with me. Now, the other side of that is that when things aren't going our way, when things don't work out the way we hoped they would work out, when we don't receive the blessings we hoped that we would receive, when we are not the one that gets the promotion, when we are not the one who wins the game, whatever it might be, we tend to moralize that circumstance as well, and we say, God must not be pleased with me. It must be because I did something bad or wrong or whatever. So what we do is we tend to take the circumstances of life and moralize it and say, this is God's way of either rewarding or punishing me for doing or not doing what He wanted me to do or not do. We use our circumstances as the rumble strips. And here's the problem. Most of the time, when we do that, the vast majority of the time, this is my opinion, the vast majority of the time, we are dead wrong. Especially when it's on the negative side. We think that the circumstances of this life are God's way of punishing us. And we tend to pay more attention to those and project more upon God on those. But it's also equally dangerous to take all the positive things and say, God must approve. God must approve of my lifestyle. God must approve of my choices because everything's coming up roses for me. That is a super dangerous way to live. It is a super dangerous way to live. When we do this, we are, in essence, we are trading the circumstances of this life that God has not promised that would be our guide for His Word, for the Scriptures that God has given us in order to be our guide. That is our guide. This is how we ought to live. And so we're going to be talking about this idea and trying to bring this out of this story of Esther. It's a fascinating story. One of the interesting things, I think one of the most interesting things about the book of Esther is that God is not mentioned one time in the book of Esther. Did you know that? Not one time is He mentioned. As a matter of fact, there are only 2 books in all of the Bible that the name of God is not mentioned. One is the book of Esther. The other is the Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs. We're not going to be talking about that this time, maybe later. But the book of Esther doesn't mention the name of God at all. Doesn't talk about God, doesn't say this is what God said to do. There's no prophet speaking for God in this story. It is just the circumstances of this story, just the circumstances of this life being communicated through an author. We don't know exactly who authored this. Most people guess it's Mordecai, who's one of the characters in this story. Would have probably most likely been the one to have written this down and distributed it. He would have had not only the life experience. I mean, he lived all of these things, first person from Mordecai, but he would have also had the means, as we will come to see, to not only get this on paper but get it distributed throughout the Jewish world, for sure. So in an effort to do a little bit of orientation here as we begin this journey, we are this book begins during the reign of a king named Ahasuerus, who you probably know him better as Xerxes. If you've heard his name, that's probably the one you've heard and remembered. The scriptures use his other name, Ahasuerus. It's a little bit harder to say, so if you don't mind, I'm going to use Xerxes. But at the very beginning, in chapter 1, it says all this stuff starts in the 3rd year of his reign. Now, Xerxes is kind of a big name during the exile of the Jews from Israel. It's been a while since that happened, since those days. So if we went back in time to the time when the Israelites were exiled to Babylon, the king of Babylon at the time was Nebuchadnezzar. He was the one who, it was under Nebuchadnezzar that the city of Jerusalem was laid siege to for years. It was awful. We won't get into all that. It was an ugly, ugly time. And Jerusalem fell under him, and all of Judea with it. Most of the royalty were just wiped out. The king, I believe it was Zerubbabel, his eyes were gouged out. After the last thing he saw was his children put to death. His eyes were gouged out, and he was sent back to Babylon into a special prison where Nebuchadnezzar kept all his collection of kings. Different people collect different stuff. All right, so Nebuchadnezzar, he just had this collection of kings. All of the kings that he had, of the kingdoms that he had destroyed, some of them he cut their toes off, some of them he cut arms off, some of them he did all kinds of stuff with, but then he kept them alive in his library of kings. And it was something that if you were a king who was not yet under Nebuchadnezzar's throne, he would invite you to Babylon, and you can go on this tour of the city. And by the way, let's go into this. What's this place? Oh, you got to see this. These are all the kings that tried to stand against me. See what he was doing? You wouldn't do that, though, because you don't want to live here. Right? Nebuchadnezzar. Whew, great guy. Amazing. After Nebuchadnezzar, and it was with, Nebuchadnezzar was the, Daniel was during his reign, the book of Daniel, and Nebuchadnezzar's son was Belshazzar, and Belshazzar he was no Nebuchadnezzar. Let's just say that. He was an interesting fella. He really liked Zerubbabel. They talked a lot, and he actually freed Zerubbabel from this this library of kings that his father had, and he allowed Zerubbabel to live outside of this dungeon. Gave him a daily kind of allotment of food, and just let him be free as long as he stayed in the city. And they ate. He ate at the king's table for the rest of his life with Belshazzar. Doesn't mean Belshazzar was a great guy. Neither does it mean that Zerubbabel was. They were just, they were companions, and they talked and they knew each other well. Belshazzar was the guy at the handwriting on the wall. Remember that story? Belshazzar was the one who decided to throw a big party and take all of the stuff that his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem and use it for the table service in a nice party that he was throwing. Terrible idea, but live and learn, right? Or die and learn, really, is what it turned out to be. And as he's having this party, this disembodied hand writes on the wall, and nobody knows what it says. And finally, they ask the king's mother, who was the wife of Nebuchadnezzar, she says, you got to talk to this guy, Daniel. He knows everything. So they bring Daniel sort of out of retirement, and for the third time in his career, Belshazzar tells him, I will give you up to half my kingdom if you can tell me what this is. And Daniel tells him what it is, that God has judged him, and bad things are going to happen. That very night, Cyrus, the Persian, knocks on the door, walks into the room, and he has already sacked Babylon. Took the city without a fight while the king was having a party. Amazing story, right? This is great stuff. But this isn't what we're talking about today. But then Cyrus is the king. Cyrus, and it's actually a co-regent. If you read it, it's Cyrus and Darius the Mede. Darius the Mede is sort of like, he's sort of like this weird historical figure. I think they made him king just to make some peace, and he just kind of hangs around with Cyrus. But he really doesn't do much, and he's really not very good for much. And so he's just somebody who's there. It gets mentioned in the Bible a few times, but really not to big effect. After Cyrus is the one that sends the Israelites back to Jerusalem, allows them to rebuild the temple, and Ezra leads that. And the book of Ezra talks about all that, leads this effort to rebuild the temple of God. And then later on, it's not Darius the Mede, but after Cyrus is king, there's another guy named Darius. He's actually a pretty decent king, as kings go. I'm not saying he's a good person. He was just a good ruler, a little bit. I mean, he's better than Darius the Mede. Who was that guy anyway? Nobody knows. Nobody cares. It was just somebody's nephew that needed a job, I think. And so Darius the First is now king of the Medo-Persian Empire, and he's the one that sends Nehemiah back because there's a temple, but there's no walls. The city's still in ruins. It's just an absolute mess, and the Jews that are living there are just being harassed by all the other non-Jewish people that are living in that area. Just a bunch of highwaymen and scoundrels that are just having their way. And so Nehemiah goes back under Darius the First, rebuilds the wall, gets all that done. And Darius the First is then, after his death, then we've got Xerxes. And that's where we are. Third year of Xerxes, all this other stuff has happened. The Israelites are back in the land. There's a temple, there's a wall, but not all the Jews have gone. If you read it would be Ezra and Nehemiah, it talks about those who go back. Wasn't very many. People didn't really want to go back because they had it really good in the empire. Everything was built there. Everything back in Israel is in ruins. There's a lot of work to be done, and not that many people wanted to go back. It's kind of sad. And so the return is very, very slow. And so still here in this capital city, now that is Susa, which is further south than Babylon. This is where the king lives. It's on the, you can see the sea and all that. It's much better place to live. There's lots of Jews there. The kingdom's built. Everything's getting along. Why go, right? It's just a lot of work. Things are working out here pretty well. So that's kind of where we get into this story. In the first chapter of Esther, I'm not going to read it, just going to sum it up for you. There's this story about this lady named Queen Vashti. She is the queen, and I want you, when we think of queen, we tend to think of a very powerful, politically powerful person. And in a way she was, but in many ways she was not. She was not a very powerful woman. She was just a very fortunate woman to be able to, live in the lap of luxury at the palace and be the queen. But even then, it's not as good as it sounds, because she is one woman in a harem that is countless. In other words, the king sleeps with as many women as the king wants to. That's just one of the ways that these kings would just, feed their own desires and demonstrate their own power and all of this. Look at how many women are in my harem. It's sort of, not that was completely foreign to even the kings of Israel. We know Solomon had this giant harem as well, and so Vashti is the queen because of the king. Xerxes really did think very highly, very, very highly of Xerxes. He was very proud of himself, and he thought, he was the greatest since sliced bread. He was very full of himself. And he was about to go on a military campaign against Greece. It wasn't going to go well, but he didn't know that yet. And so he decides, in preparation for all this, he's going to do some partying. And for 180 days, that is 6 months, he's throwing this party 180 days long for all of, just everybody in Susa, for the kingdom. We're just living it up, partying, drawing people in to be a part of this thing that's going to happen. And so 180 days. When that is all over, he throws a big feast at the end of this. Now, this one, the other one was for everybody. This one is especially for all the nobles and people who with probably money, who could help finance coming wars and whatnot. And so he throws this big party, and Queen Vashti at the same time throws this giant party for all the women. And there's a lot of drinking going on. It's a week-long party, and toward the end of it, most Bible commentators point out that everybody was, they don't say this, but they were trashed. They had drank a lot. And Xerxes decides that he wants to demonstrate how much more beautiful his wife is than all the other wives, and invites her from her party to come and demonstrate her beauty in a way that is morally dubious. I'm being like a Bible translator right now, putting it very politely, okay? And she says, "No, thank you." And that's not okay. You don't tell the king no. And the king is angry, and his nobles are angry. I think they're angry because they're like, if my wife gets word of this, that it's okay to say no to your husband, what's going to happen? It's going to be craziness around here. And so they decide together that this can't stand, and Xerxes deposes the queen. In other words, she is shipped out. You can never return to this city. You're done. And he doesn't have her killed, but he sends her away. She's no longer queen, deposed and out, and all the other guys. Yeah, let this be a lesson to all our wives. When we say to do something, by golly, you better do it. That's not a biblical principle. I just want to point this out. Okay? These are a bunch of godless people that are just trying to hold as much power as they can over as many people as they can. Jesus says, not so with you. Okay? Good. We all got that. So she's out. After a while, Xerxes sobers up. I think it took a while honestly, maybe a couple years. He sobers up, and he's getting kind of lonely. There is no queen. I don't know why he would be lonely, because he didn't depose his entire harem. But some of these guys are, he's like bummed out that, Vashti's not queen. He's like, I did kind of like her. Or something, I don't know. And so these guys come up with this great idea. We're going to search through the entire kingdom, and we're going to find, we're going to gather all these virgins. We'll bring them into your harem of virgins. There's 2 harems, one of just virgins, one of that's no longer virgins. You're following me, okay? Just don't make me go into it. And so we're going to put them all in there, and we're going to spend a year. We'll give them a year of beauty treatments. And you're like, why a year? It's like, because a year is a little bit longer than it takes to have a baby. And it will prove that they're all virgins. If any of those virgins have a baby during that year, they're dismissed. You follow me? Okay. So we'll do that, and then the king can just browse. He's got this library of virgins now, and he just says, hey, send another one in, and whichever one the king delights in most can be queen. I often hear people talk about the beauty contest, like it's a Miss Babylon pageant or something like that. That is not what's happening. The scriptures are very clear that Esther was beautiful. She was very beautiful. But here's what you need to know. They were all beautiful. The point of this story isn't Esther's beauty. So this is what the king decides to do. Vashti's gone, and now he's looking for a new one. So we get into chapter 2, and so this is where we're going to be. Here's what I want you to see. Esther, I think you can read through this book so quickly. It's 10 chapters. It goes by really fast, and when you read through it, it can feel like it all happened like in a year. And it didn't. The book of Esther it's like almost an entire decade in the book of Esther. Most of the writings in these sum up periods of time. You get a paragraph that just like covered 6 years. And so all this is happening from the time that Queen Vashti is deposed to the time that Esther is made queen is 7 years. 2 chapters of this book. So here's the point of knowing this. This was not just this nice little tight and tidy season of Esther's life. All of this took a very long time to unfold. A lot of other things happened while this was unfolding. So when we look into chapter 2, what we see is here's Queen Esther, and she's chosen queen in chapter 2, but it starts out with all of these nobles getting together and coming up with this great plan. All of these virgins being taken into the first harem while they're prepared. We're doing all these beauty treatments and all of this stuff. They're put under the charge of the king's eunuchs, and they're in charge of all of this process. And you could just imagine. Well, I don't know if you can. I don't know if you should. Just imagine what it would be like waiting in this harem for someday when the king is going to call you for the express purpose of you just going in and sleeping with a person you've never met. And if you please him, he may or may not call on you ever again. Either way, you're going to go to the second harem and probably live out the rest of your days there. And that's it. That doesn't sound great. So I don't know if sometimes we read this story and we think, wow, God must have really liked Esther. But then I read this and think about this stuff, and if we're just doing this based on circumstances, I bet Esther might have thought once or twice, if she's doing it on this, on the same set of circumstances that we're looking at, what did I do to deserve this? I don't know that she ever said that or thought that, but I think we might in that same set of circumstances. We also have this, if we're doing this, right, it's like, Esther was so beautiful. I bet she looked at, she'd look in the mirror and say, oh, God must really love me. Made me so pretty. We think that the Bible says that Esther became queen because she was pretty. It does not. It does not say that. But it does say something, and I lean toward that Esther had an understanding that is maybe better than ours usually is of God's work in her life. I want you to notice, I want to point out a theme today, if you'll follow me. So in Esther chapter 2, I'm going to start in verse 5. I'm going to read a couple of passages here. In verse 5, it says this. Now there was a Jew in Susa. This is sort of introducing the cast here. The Jew in Susa, the citadel, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yair, son of Shimei, son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem among the captives, carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had carried away. I think I said Zerubbabel. I'm sorry, Jeconiah. He was bringing up Hadassah. By the way, Esther's Hebrew name, the name she was born with, Hadassah, means myrtle, like the tree. It was actually in that day and age most likely very symbolic for the hopes of the Jews, because Israel at this time was a desolate place, and it was just covered with briars and thorns and all of this stuff. But God was allowing the return, and there would, instead of the thorns, there would be myrtle growing. And so it was this kind of idea, this hopefulness. Hadassah was her name, and Esther was her Babylonian name. That name literally means star. The daughter of his uncle, for she had neither father nor mother. The young woman had a beautiful figure and was lovely to look at, and when her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. She was in some ways an orphan. Her parents died very young age, and looking at circumstances, she might have been tempted to say at one time in her life, God must not love me. Took my parents. If we're just looking at circumstances, friends, we're not looking at much in the whole scheme of things. We're going to skip down to verse 9 now, and there's a lot of details that are in here that just I'm just going to skip over for now, because I want you to see this theme. In verse 9 it says, "And the young woman pleased him and won his favor." He is, by the way, the eunuch that is in charge of all of the virgins. Right? She gets placed in his care. Now for a year, she's going to go through all these beauty treatments. And it says, and the young woman pleased him and won his favor. How did she do that? It doesn't say. The Bible doesn't say. Here's how she did this. Maybe it was her character. Maybe it was her sweetness. Maybe she was just a really nice person. And maybe maybe it was just her beauty. And he was just like, oh, she's so beautiful, I'll do whatever. Probably not. The young woman pleased him and won his favor. And he quickly provided her with her cosmetics and her portion of food, and with 7 chosen young women from the king's palace, and advanced her and her young women to the best place in the harem. So for whatever reason, this guy decides to use the authority that he has, to advance Esther. Why? We don't know. The reason given is favor. Favor. Now we're going to skip down a little bit further and to verse 15. Now it's time. It's Esther's time has come. A lot of time has passed in these couple verses, but Esther's time has come. She has now been told she is to, we say, go before the king. It's her turn to sleep with the king. By the way, I probably should have mentioned, this sermon's like PG-13. I'm telling you too late. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter, to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Hegai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. She was not being difficult. She didn't want more than whatever this guy said to have. She just was doing what she was told. Now Esther, it says, was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. She was winning favor in the eyes of all who saw her. And when Esther was taken to King Xerxes into the royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign, the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she won grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Then the king gave a great feast for all his officials and servants. It was Esther's feast. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. Wow, could you imagine how popular that would make a person? Could you imagine, we got a single president and he gets married and he's so happy about it. He's like, you know what? I'm so happy about getting married. No taxes this year, everybody. And well, first of all, no, we can't imagine that. That's like, everyone in Washington would be dead. Can't have that. We can't imagine that. But this is this remission of taxes, all this stuff. Esther was the headline across the entire empire. This is a big deal. God must really love me. Listen, I don't know that she looked in the mirror and said that, but if she did, she would have been right for the wrong reason. And being right for the wrong reason is very dangerous when it comes to this stuff. Because when circumstances change, then all we have left is God must not love me. I really don't think in my heart that that's what was going through Esther and what was going through her heart and her mind. But I got to tell you, that thought goes through my mind way too much. And I think that thought goes through your mind way too much. I want you to know something. I hope you can see this. And if you doubt, listen, you're free to push back all you want. Go for it. Search the scriptures to see what is going on here. But listen, Esther did not become queen because she was the most beautiful person that ever lived. No, that's not why. She was beautiful. She was beautiful. The Bible says it. But that's not why. She was beautiful because she had favor with the king. And our question ought to be, why? What is that about? This theme of favor with the king. I want to point you at two other scriptures, just two, because it's getting late. The first is Acts chapter 7. In Acts chapter 7, the young man Stephen, who was one of the first martyrs among the Christians, he's preaching this great sermon and to the Jews that day that are about to stone him. This is the end. This is his final words in this life, right? for him. And in verse 7, or in chapter 7, he's preaching all this. He's going through the history of the Israelites, and he's preaching this great sermon. And it is a great sermon. I wish he would have got a chance to finish it. But he's basically, his point in all of this is God led the Israelites through all these circumstances, and every single time they got it wrong the first time and right the second time. And then this would happen, and they got it wrong the first time and right the second time, wrong the first time, right the second time. Jesus comes, they get it wrong the first time, and they stoned him. If he got to finish his sermon, he would have said, "You're going to get it right the second time." But in verses 9 and 10, listen to what he says. He says, "And the patriarchs," he's talking about Joseph, right? Before Exodus, back in Genesis, the patriarchs, jealous of Joseph, sold him into Egypt. Terrible circumstances. God must not love me. But God was with him." What? And listen, "and rescued him out of all his afflictions and gave him favor and wisdom before Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who made him ruler over Egypt, over all his household." God gave him favor. Joseph didn't give himself favor. God gave him favor. Okay, we're gonna turn a little bit. We're going to go to Daniel. Daniel, chapter 1. Daniel's one of the guys who, as a young boy, he was just a little boy. Parents were probably put to death in Jerusalem. Daniel came with all these other children. They just shipped him off to Babylon to re-educate them in Babylonian schools, and then he would serve the king. And it says that Daniel resolved when he was in Babylon that he would not defile himself with the king's food, right? He was not going to eat unclean food. He was going to follow the scriptures. He was going to be obedient to God. And so he decided he was not going to do this with the king's food or the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And if you know the story of Daniel, that was just the first of many times that God would give Daniel favor. And he just kept rising up in the ranks because of this favor that was coming from God until the kings of the empire 3 times in his life gave him up to half of their kingdom. At least offered it. Daniel was one of the most powerful men in Babylon in his day. Why? Because Daniel was the smartest person on the face of the earth. No. Because of God's favor. If you want to know why Esther is queen, here it is. God's favor. It's the reason for all of this. Now listen, Esther has no idea what's coming. We do because we're reading it in a book. She was actually living it, right? She's going through this stuff. She's like, she's been made queen, and that's amazing. And now she lives, in this palace apart from the king. The king still has his harem, still has all these virgins, still doing all the stuff the king used to do. She's just queen now. She has no idea why. It just is. And if she weren't careful, she could make this all about her, couldn't she? I might. You might. We'd be tempted to. Because, man, when things are going great, it's so easy and it's so tempting to just say, man, the reason for all of this is He just really wanted me to have it all. And in that moment, we couldn't be more mistaken. It's just being human for us to think that everything in our possession is for our consumption. And the reason it's so easy is because we think we're the reason for it. And we are not. We are definitely not. Look, there's a lot of story left to go, and we're going to cover this tomorrow, next week, not tomorrow. We can do it tomorrow if you guys all want to come back. I would totally be there, but we'll do it next week, okay? We'll do it next Sunday. But listen, here's what I want to do. I want to challenge you with this, because I think you and I need to not just put ourselves in Esther's story, but put Esther into ours. And I want to challenge you to take an honest, it's so easy to take a dishonest look. Don't even bother. But if you will, take an honest look, like gut level, honest look at your life and how God is demonstrating His grace, giving favor in your life. And pay very close attention to your relationships and opportunities. Where has God shown His favor in your life? Where has God somehow placed you? Maybe you've gotten some promotions. Is that all you, or could that be God's favor at work in your life? Maybe you have, maybe God has placed you in the midst of a work environment that is really odd. Maybe something that you wouldn't have automatically chosen for yourself, and you're just like, how did I end up here? And maybe what you should do, and I would challenge you to do, is to consider that you might be there because of God's favor. Who is God giving you favor with? How is God demonstrating His favor in your life? Friends, be very careful not to moralize the instances of God's favor or perceived lack of it. Some of you today might be going through some really difficult circumstances, and you're thinking, favor? What do you mean favor? My life is a mess. It's all this stuff, and I don't know what to do with it. Be careful not to moralize that. To place on God some moral overtone, like He doesn't love you, or so He's already promised that He does love you. He's demonstrated that He does. You have to be willing to push all that other stuff aside and see it for what it is. God is at work in your life somehow. In the positive circumstances, in the super ugly circumstances, folks, in the next few weeks, we're going to get into some really, really devastatingly ugly circumstances. Circumstances that are not unlike circumstances that we see playing out right now around the world. Is this evidence of either God's love or the lack of it? No. But friends, God is at work. He's at work in this world, and He is at work in your life. And I just want to challenge you to take a look, an honest look at all of this stuff. So don't, fight the desire to either self-exalt or self-assault. That's not what any of this is about. It's not about you. Just be humble in your circumstances, and if He chooses, look at your life, if He chooses to work through you, it's not because of you. It's not because you are better than everyone else. If He doesn't do what you hoped or expected, it's not because He's displeased with you. He's working His plan, not yours. He's working His plan, not yours. He's working His plan, not yours. And you need to start working His plan, not yours. I'm telling you, when you do, it'll be amazing, the peace that begins to come into your life. When you're working against God's plan in your life, there's going to be a lot of turbulence. I'm just saying, God's pretty tough. Who can stand against the Lord? Start working his plan. You will begin to experience his peace. This is how you do it. Look for his favor. Where is it? Where is he working in your life? He's giving you favor. The story of Esther, although it is only a few chapters long, spans so many years. And despite our propensity to romanticize this story, this is not one of those. This is not a happily ever after kind of situation. Otherwise, it would end in chapter 2. It does not. While Esther is queen, that doesn't mean that she is in a place of great power, only that she is near to the place of that power. And I think if we asked, God would say, yep, that's strategic. But her life is far from a fairy tale. Rather, it's full of pain and fear. But God is always working, and Esther is called upon to put her trust in God, in God's perfect plan, not Esther's perfect plan, and trust him for the results regardless of what might happen to her. So, friends, what does trusting in God's plan look like for your life right now? In what ways has God given you favor with those around you? And how has God situated you to be a servant for his kingdom in a timely way? If you take your life and stop making it all about you and just kind of push all that out of the way, I bet it'll start coming into focus. What if God is at work all around you every day to leverage your life for his purposes and his glory? And you can't see it because all you can see is what you see in the mirror. Friends, God is working his plan, not yours. You need to work his plan, not yours. And if you do, you will not regret it. Not one day.